When you think about the year 1979, it really feels like one of those moments when the world just shifted. But the Iranian Revolution wasn't just another flashpoint in the Cold War. It was something much deeper. It was the explosive climax of a 100-year fight for Iran to control its own destiny. And to really understand the fire of 1979, we've got to go back and see where the sparks first started.
You see, the revolution didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of a long, long struggle for national sovereignty, a fight to control Iran's own incredible resources. This was a battle against powerful forces, both outside its borders and from within.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with Iran's very first taste of democracy, then move into the rise of a powerful, modernizing king. We'll explore a foreign-backed coup that was all about oil, and then see how a period of unbelievable prosperity actually, and kind of paradoxically, set the stage for that same king's downfall. All right, let's dive in. To get why 1979 happened, we have to rewind the clock to the turn of the 20th century. This is where the kindling for that revolutionary fire was first laid down. Okay, so picture this. Iran, which was called Persia back then, is literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the British Empire, and the hard place is the Russian Empire. This whole rivalry was known as the Great Game, and both empires were constantly meddling in Iran's business, propping up these weak Qajar kings who in turn would sell off the country's resources. We're talking tobacco, minerals, you name it, just to fund their own lavish lifestyles. As you can imagine, this sparked some serious resentment among the Iranian people. And all that resentment, well, it had to go somewhere. It boiled over into Iran's first real attempt to grab the steering wheel and take control of its own future. It was called the Constitutional Revolution, and it was this incredible push to create a representative government and put a check on the Shah's absolute power. What made this revolution so amazing was the alliance that drove it. Think of Iranian society at the time as a three-legged stool. You had the modern educated thinkers, the intelligentsia, you had the traditional merchants of the bazaar, the bazaris, and you had the super influential clergy, the ulama. For the very first time, these three groups, who didn't always see eye to eye, united for one cause: to stop the corruption and kick out foreign control. And you know what? They actually did it. They forced the Shah to accept a constitution and create a national parliament, the Majlis. This document was a huge deal. It basically said that the government gets its power from the people, not from some divine right of a king. It planted a seed that would never really go away, the demand for the rule of law. But that dream, it didn't last long. The coalition that had been so strong started to fracture, and, of course, the great powers stepped in. Britain and Russia, who only ever saw Iran as a chessboard piece in their great game, literally carved the country up into spheres of influence. By 1911, it was over. Russian troops marched right into Tehran and shut down the parliament by force. Iran's first democratic experiment was completely crushed. So out of all that chaos after World War I, a new strongman steps onto the scene. In 1921, a military officer named Reza Khan marches on Tehran. By 1925, he crowns himself Reza Shah, and just like that, the Pahlavi dynasty begins. Now, Reza Shah's rule was a total paradox. On the one hand, he dragged Iran kicking and screaming into the 20th century. He built a modern, centralized state, a national army, and huge infrastructure projects. But all of this top-down modernization came at a massive cost. He pushed a secular, pre-Islamic identity to try and unify everyone, which totally sidelined the clergy. And he systematically crushed any and all political opposition. So he built a modern nation, but he took away its political freedom. Then comes World War II. The Allies, worried about Reza Shah's ties to Germany, invade Iran and force him to give up the throne to his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The new, young Shah inherited a nation where the next big fight was going to be about one thing: its most precious resource, oil. And this slide right here, this gets to the very heart of the problem. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was basically a British-run state operating inside of Iran, controlling everything. And these numbers tell the whole story. Britain was getting fabulously wealthy from Iranian oil, while Iran itself was only seeing a tiny fraction of the profits. This wasn't just about money. For Iranians, it was a national humiliation. And that's when a man named Mohammad Mossadegh enters the picture. He was this charismatic, incredibly popular nationalist who gets elected prime minister. And in 1951, with the full backing of Parliament, he does what everyone thought was impossible. He nationalizes the oil company, declaring that Iran's oil belongs to the Iranian people. It was a huge, bold statement of national sovereignty. Well, Britain's reaction was immediate. They organized a global boycott that just strangled Iran's economy. But when that wasn't enough, they went to the United States for help. Now, this is the height of the Cold War, and Washington is terrified Mossadegh might drift toward the Soviets. So what happens? In August 1953, the CIA and MI6 organize a covert coup that topples Iran's democratically elected government. And make no mistake, this operation was meticulously planned by foreign spies. MI6 called it Operation Boot, the CIA called it Operation Ajax. This moment is often called the original sin in U.S.-Iran relations. It completely shattered Iran's democratic dreams and left this deep, lasting legacy of mistrust toward the West. So with Mossadegh gone, the Shah is put back on the throne with absolute power, now as a key American ally in the Cold War. Drowning in oil money, he launches this really ambitious modernization program that he calls the White Revolution. And on paper, it was a wild success. The White Revolution brought in things like land reform and the right for women to vote, plus massive industrial projects. And just look at this number. The economy was booming. By the late 60s, Iran's economy was growing at almost 10% a year. The Shah really thought he was turning Iran into a global superpower. But that shiny modern veneer was built on a really shaky foundation. All that new wealth wasn't being shared fairly, and the Shah's aggressive push for westernization was deeply alienating to a very traditional society. This progress came with a very high price. And that price was political freedom. To hold on to power and crush any dissent, the Shah relied on SAVAK, his notoriously brutal secret police. It was actually set up with help from the CIA and Israeli Mossad. And SAVAK quickly became this symbol of tyranny, silencing anyone who dared to speak out through fear, prison, and torture. Hey, remember that three-legged stool that held up the constitutional revolution? Well, the Shah's policies basically took a saw to each and every leg. His aggressive secularism and land reforms infuriated the clergy. His state-run economy pushed out the merchants. And his secret police, SAVAK, terrorized the intelligentsia. He had managed to destroy the very pillars of Iranian society. So by the late 1970s, the Shah, for all his country's oil wealth and military power, was basically sitting on a political powder keg. His policies had somehow managed to tick off almost every single major group in Iranian society, creating the perfect storm for a revolution. And this is where a brand new and very powerful coalition comes together. It was an alliance the Shah himself mockingly called the Union of the Black and the Red. The Black stood for the traditional religious groups led by exiled clerics like the Ayatollah Khomeini, and the Red stood for the secular leftists, the students and the intellectuals who had been crushed by his regime for years. Now, these two groups wanted very different things for Iran's future, but they shared one powerful, all-consuming goal: get rid of the Shah. 100 years of grievances, from foreign meddling and a stolen democracy to political terror and cultural alienation, it all finally came together in this massive, unstoppable popular movement that just swept across Iran. In the end, the 1979 revolution succeeded. It overthrew the Shah and achieved a goal that was a century in the making. But it leaves us with a really critical question. After this long, painful fight for sovereignty and self-determination, did the revolution actually deliver it to the Iranian people? Or did it just turn the page to a new and maybe even more complicated chapter in that very same struggle?